We start this hour in Egypt, where there are new developments right now in the power struggle that started with President Mohamed Morsi's grab for new powers. NBC's Ayman Mohideen is in Cairo with the details on this. And Ayman, we got word a few moments ago that there were some considerations to issue a new constitutional declaration of some sort. What can you tell us about all of this?
Sure. I mean, it's important to set the scene about what triggered these protests 2 weeks ago, and that was a constitutional declaration issued by President Morsi that was described as a power grab. It essentially gave him sweeping powers through the remainder of this transitional period. Well, it triggered protests. One of the central demands of the protesters and the opposition to the president has been that he rescind that decree. Well, for the past several days, the president has been trying to figure out a way to kind of minimize the scope of that decree. It has not worked. It has not pleased the opposition. Today, he met with some of the opposition forces, and what we're learning now from Egyptian state television, which is an official government news source, is that the prime minister has suggested that the president is considering a new constitutional declaration, and perhaps in light of that new constitutional declaration, he would mitigate some of the new powers that he has assumed and perhaps meet the demands of the protesters on this one central issue, Craig.
And this presumably would be in direct response to the tens of thousands of protesters that we have seen behind you over the past 10 days?
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. The protesters have said that the presidential decree that was issued on November 22nd was a power grab. It allowed him to make legislation without any type of judicial reviews, and that his decisions were final until a new constitution, a larger constitution, was officially ratified. What we're now learning is that perhaps after meeting with the opposition today and in the face of both political pressure and isolation, the president could be backtracking on some of the powers he granted himself in that declaration. We'll certainly learn more about it in the coming hours if, in fact, there is an official statement. Right now, we're learning officially only from Egyptian state media, which is the government-controlled news media here in Cairo.
And with regards to the scene that's been behind you unfolding, what has that been like, today versus a week ago today?
Well, today it's relatively peaceful. It has been really since Wednesday. Tuesday and Wednesday earlier this week, those were the violent protests. And what had happened was the protesters initially marched from Tahrir Square onto the presidential palace. They camped out there. But supporters of President Morsi, mostly from the Muslim Brotherhood and other Islamist parties, came, and that's when the confrontation began. That's what led the military to deploy around the presidential palace on Wednesday. Today, the military was erecting concrete barriers outside the presidential palace to make sure that a similar scene does not repeat itself, but the protesters are still camped out, very much defiant, very much adamant that they will stay outside the presidential palace until the president meets all of their demands, including this declaration and building and writing a new constitution with a broader national consensus, not one that just favors the Islamists in power. Craig.
Ayman Mohideen with some breaking news for us on the Saturday afternoon in Egypt, where, again, according to state media there's the prime minister there saying that they are considering a new constitutional declaration. We will check in with you a little bit later, sir. Thank you for the update. I want to bring in Mona El-Tahawi, of course, the Egyptian-American journalist who's worked extensively in the Middle East. She's currently based here in New York, and we met a week or two ago. We had you on talking about Egypt and what's happening there. First of all, let me get your initial reaction to what we just heard there from Ayman, that it appears as if President Morsi may be changing his calculations just a bit based on what he has seen unfold in the streets of Egypt.
I think President Morsi needs to change his calculations much more than just a bit. I think what's happening is that he's finally listening to his own words. He's been saying over and over again, this is not the old Egypt. And clearly, the hundreds of thousands of Egyptians on the street who were there to promote the revolution and say the revolution continues are sending him a message that not only must you amend this constitutional declaration, you must renounce all these superpowers that you've assumed for yourselves.
Well, one of the interesting things, and Ayman just hit on it there, is watching the military's role in all of this. The military now taking a center role again with dealing with these Egyptians in the streets. Well, is that move designed purely to intimidate?
Let me explain something very simply. The Muslim Brotherhood and the military are on the same side. Egypt is like a triangle at 3 points. One is the military, one is the Islamists, and the third, and the most important for me and the people on the street, is the revolution. So the military and the Muslim Brotherhood are on the same side. And when we had our presidential elections, it was Machiavellian genius for our military junta to allow Mohammed Morsi to become president. The majority of Mohammed Morsi's voters voted for him, not because they're Muslim Brotherhood, they're not. He only got 25% in the first round. They voted for him because they didn't want the junta's candidate, who was Ahmed Shafiq. The military, in the draft constitution that was rushed through last week, has guaranteed a safe exit, no trial for human rights violations, has guaranteed no civilian oversight of his budget. And don't forget, the military in Egypt get $1.3 billion from Washington. And Washington currently supports our president. And Washington, I have to add very clearly, is about to start supporting yet another dictator in Egypt. Hosni Mubarak was supported by 5 U.S. presidents. We have a senior, high-level Muslim Brotherhood official in D.C. lobbying, and Washington must understand the Egyptian people do not want dictatorship.
What's the next step there in Cairo?
Well, Mohammed Morsi's 3 mistakes were the constitutional declaration, rushing the draft constitution, and then the people who were killed on the street by Muslim Brotherhood thugs. We need accountability for that. So the people on the street will not go until accountability is reached, justice is reached, and he assures the Egyptian people.
Even if the draft constitution is approved?
Yeah, but well, see, this is the thing, because what he's saying is, you either approve the draft constitution or I'm going to keep more powers than Mubarak kept. This is a devil's choice. Who's going to choose between this and that? He must choose the revolution, as the people on the street have made very clear.
Mona El-Tahawy, thank you so much. Do appreciate your insight as always, and do hope you'll come back as well. Journalist Mona El-Tahawy shedding some light on the breaking news there in Egypt as well.